You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to buckeyegrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by buckeyegrove.com. It is Michigan week, and I am Kyle Lamb, coming to you from Broadcast Central, a place that, as the tagline suggests, is not my mother's basement, I promise. So, it is Michigan week, and unless you were living in a cave, under a rock, in a ocean, maybe a biosphere, somewhere where you did not have access to the internet or television or any kind of media, you probably know that Ohio State scraped by the hair of their chinny chin chin against Maryland, coming up with a 1-point victory in overtime on the road in College Park against the Terrapins. It came down to a 2-point conversion in overtime, and you just knew, and I said it on Twitter, as soon as Ohio State scored on that first possession in overtime, you knew Maryland was absolutely going for the win, going for the jugular if they got a chance to do so. It was not a pretty win. Ohio State's defense took several steps back after a really good performance against Michigan State. And the thing is, I know everybody has it in their mind that Michigan State is so bad offensively, and statistically they are bad offensively, but the thing about it is that at least Michigan State's offense did have a reason to be bad. They've had a lot of injuries at wide receiver. The offensive line performance by Michigan State, you can't really, you can't sugarcoat that very much. They've been bad on the offensive line, but they have had injuries at receiver. But statistically speaking, comparing Michigan State to Maryland, the offenses were comparable. Coming into the game, they had very similar S&P Plus rankings. So it's not like Ohio State went from playing one of the historically worst offenses in the nation to an offensive juggernaut, because Maryland has not been an offensive juggernaut. I don't think there was much of a difference at quarterback, even though Kasim Hill is out for the season. Tyrone Pigram taking his place. I don't think there's a big drop-off there. I think they're pretty similar quarterbacks. But still, statistically, it's not like Ohio State, played a juggernaut offensively. Nebraska was a lot better offense statistically than Maryland was, and Ohio State did not struggle with Nebraska nearly as much as they struggled in this case. But anyhow, the point here is that Maryland went for the win. They failed. This was a weird game for a lot of reasons, aside from the fact that Ohio State put up nearly 700 yards of total offense. They gave up almost 550 yards of total offense. But it was a strange game in that Ohio State's defense played really, really bad in the first quarter and the fourth quarter and overtime. But the second quarter, they played decent. Third quarter, they played really well. There's still a lot of schematic issues, some tackling issues, some things that I do want to address, and Kirk and Ross will be here in a few minutes for our Monday breakdown. We'll get into those schematics because I think we are at the crux of the issue here for the Ohio State defense. I think it's fair to say that this is not as talented as a defense as Ohio State has had in the past, but it's not like they're without talent. It's not a speed issue. It's not a physicality issue. I'm not even sure necessarily that it's a mindset issue. I think there is a lack of leadership on this defense, where Ohio State's offense has some leadership coming through. Haskins is not a natural-born leader, but he is showing some signs of becoming that. J.K. Dobbins being kind of forceful, showing emotion here. I think Ohio State's offense is on the right track, and I think they've got a chance to do something that no other team has really done this year, and that is put up points against Michigan. But it is Michigan, and by the way, big week on the show. I'm going to have a special podcast on Thanksgiving that I hope you will listen to. We will preview the Ohio State-Michigan game with our friends over at thewolverine.com, who covers Michigan for the Rivals Network. So we will get the Michigan perspective of this game, I will talk a lot about it, of course, on Thursday and Friday. On Friday, Bill Bender of the Sporting News will be along. We'll cover Ohio State, Michigan, as well as talk about some of the playoff scenarios and what's going on and what needs to happen for Michigan or Ohio State if they win this game and then go to the Big Ten Championship against Northwestern. So we'll get into scenarios and some of the other stuff. But we will also talk to Mark Gibler on the Friday show, as there is a big visit weekend for the Buckeyes coming up. So we'll get into that. And I have a few other surprises as well. But once again, I will have a special edition of the Unscripted Ohio podcast on Thursday, a Thanksgiving special, and then Friday as well. So very much looking forward to previewing this huge game for Ohio State and Michigan. Look, I know what you're thinking. Ohio State looked like blah on Saturday. It was not pretty. You know what? I have a couple of thoughts and observations about this, though. Ohio State defense, there's no excusing giving up 550 points to that Maryland team that has struggled in large stretches. Now, the running game has been somewhat successful. Some of that is getting off to an early start. They ran for a lot of yards early in the year, but as the Big Ten schedule has gone on, that average has come down a little bit. But they had 3 guys averaging 6, 7, 8 yards a carry. They have a lot of guys that have carried it this year successfully. As a team, they were averaging nearly 6 yards a carry. So this Maryland offense has done well running the ball. So what they did to Ohio State was not totally unusual. Now, Anthony McFarland running for just 7 yards shy of 300 yards. That's just absolutely incredible to think about. Nobody has done that since Tim Biaka-Batuka did against Ohio State back in 1993. And I know nobody wants to think about, it was 1995 where that happened. Nobody wants to think about that game. That was a nightmare. But on the other hand, Ohio State has been incredibly successful in this series against Michigan, so maybe that nightmare has fallen back in people's memories just a little bit. But look, the thing is, I'm not sugarcoating what happened to Ohio State on defense. It was ugly. It certainly gives you some pause. It gives you some worry. And you could dismiss it. If it were just one game, you could dismiss it as, okay, no big deal. It's not going to play a factor, play a role against Michigan this upcoming week. But obviously, Ohio State's defense has not been very good this year. This is not the first time that we've had this conversation, this discussion. It feels like Groundhog Day. I'm going to be asking Kirk and Ross about what happened here to the Ohio State defense. We've been through this before. We've seen this movie. That being said, I posted on Twitter after this game. I said, look, you can't judge this game. You can't judge the Michigan game and what you think the result is going to be on Saturday by what Ohio State did or did not do against Maryland, because we've seen this so many times before in the past. I said the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry does not matter, does not care what you did the week before or what you did previous weeks against other opponents. First of all, the transitive property doesn't work. Second of all, different styles, different circumstances. The Ohio State defense has struggled with the boundary runs, and there are certain things that they have consistently had problems with, and Michigan presents some of those problems. Don't get me wrong, there are some issues that Michigan brings to the forefront against the Ohio State defense, but still, Maryland does run a slightly different offense, and what Maryland did will not necessarily carry over to Michigan. But the other thing I said, aside from the fact that the rivalry has shown that what you do in previous weeks doesn't really matter, I have the stats to back that up. And I posted this, I don't know if you saw it Saturday evening on my Twitter account at KYLam8, or if you saw it Sunday. But there is proof here that Ohio State looking very, very suspect or very poor the game before Michigan just doesn't carry over. I went back since 2001. Ohio State has had 9 games out of 17. 9 games out of 17, they have either lost outright, gone to overtime in order to win. They're 5-0 in overtime, and they've had 4 losses outright. Okay, that's the week before Michigan. Out of those 9 games, 7 of them, they bounced back since 2001. 7-2, they bounced back and beat Michigan the very next week. So going to overtime, struggling, losing a game, you would think it makes Ohio State vulnerable against Michigan, but it has not. They've still won 7 of those 9 situations where they came back the next week and beat the Wolverines. So, in one of those years, by the way, 2011, they struggled against everybody, and they still nearly won in Ann Arbor. So this Ohio State team has been able to overcome very sloppy, suspect games before. 5 overtime wins the week before Michigan since 2001. That right there tells you a lot. And in addition to those 9 games I mentioned, 2 other times Ohio State has only won by a field goal or less. So that's 11 out of 17 games that Ohio State has really been taken down to the wire or flat out lost right before playing the Wolverines, and they still have managed to get it done. So bottom line here is I'm not saying that there aren't reasons to be concerned about where Ohio State's defense is at, but I am telling you that ultimately you can't look at this game as some kind of litmus test for what will happen against Michigan on Saturday. It just flat out, for whatever reasons, this rivalry, the game results just sort of stand for themselves. It's a different game. It's a different situation. You can pretty much, I know it's so cliche to say, but you really do just kind of have to throw out the records. The winner of this game is going to be based on who shows up that day, who makes the plays, who gets it done in the trenches. It's going to be a toughness thing. It's going to be making plays. There are a lot of aspects, a lot of roles here, a lot of things that make this game what it is. But what happened against Maryland on Saturday, the 1-point victory in overtime, it's just not going to mean a hill of beans when it comes to kickoff, noon Eastern time, ABC, Ohio State, Michigan, the renewal of the rivalry. It's just not going to matter. And that's my biggest point, my biggest takeaway here. So, look, we're going to have a lot to talk about. Kirk and Ross coming up here in just a second. Like I said, on Thursday, Thanksgiving, I'll have a special Unscripted Ohio podcast as we preview Ohio State, Michigan, and then I'll carry that over to our normal Friday podcast where we talk about the recruiting aspect, who Ohio State has coming in. Mark Gibler will give us the latest on all of the visitors, and Bill Benner of the Sporting News will be along as we look at the bigger picture. What are the scenarios? And I know some of you are saying, and some of you have told me, and I understand on Twitter, you want this to be about Ohio State, Michigan. It's about the game, right? At the end of the day, none of these scenarios matter for Ohio State if they don't win the game. And that's very true. Ohio State has to win or else the playoff discussion is over. The Big Ten discussion is over. It's all or nothing for Ohio State this week when it comes to this game. So, yeah, from that standpoint, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the playoff scenarios, but they are there, and with West Virginia going down, Ohio State is in position. You got to become an Alabama fan, by the way. I'll talk more about that with Bill on Friday, but you really have to root for Alabama because Georgia knocking off Alabama could be the death knell to Ohio State's playoff chances, even with a win against Michigan and a win against Northwestern in the Big Ten title game. Alabama losing would probably be the thing that knocks Ohio State out of the discussion. Now, if Alabama takes care of business and Ohio State wins out, then it's going to come down to Ohio State and whether Oklahoma wins out or Washington State wins out. It's going to come down to one of those 3 teams, assuming, of course, Notre Dame and Clemson both win out. And Clemson is on easy street right now. I don't see them losing. I don't see Notre Dame losing to USC, but, who knows? Stranger things have happened. So we'll get into playoff scenarios a little bit on Friday. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but I do want to talk about it because they are there and they are relevant. I got Kirk and Ross coming up, and I'll talk some Ohio State basketball late in the show as the Buckeyes stay with their winning ways. They came out with an 89-61 win against South Carolina State, but I will talk about that just briefly at the end of the show. Let's get into the X's and O's, schematics, what happened with Ohio State, Maryland with Kirk and Ross.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, Kirk and Ross are with me, and we're going to break down whatever the heck that is we saw on Saturday. Let's get right into it. I want to spend the first 10 minutes or so. We'll kind of talk about the travesty we saw on defense for Ohio State against Maryland, and then we'll spend kind of the second 10, kind of ballparking and generalizing about this big matchup that we have coming up this week. So, Ross, I'm going to get right into it here and start with you. The defense was good in stretches and just outright horrible in others. And like the second and third quarter, quarter was decent. Third quarter was really good, but then they got back. I thought maybe they wore down a little bit in the fourth quarter. They got back into some bad habits and then gave up some big plays in the pass game downfield. But here's the thing people are asking, and this is kind of what I'm curious about. We have seen so many big plays there, and you've mentioned that probably 80% of their big plays on the run game are coming to the boundary, and Maryland was just shredding them in the first half. 2 of the first 4 plays went for 2 runs of 150 yards, and that's where, Anthony McFarland almost 300 yards rushing against Ohio State, which hasn't been done since Tim Biakabatuka, and I know people don't want to hear that name this week of all weeks. So here's the question I have. Watching these run plays develop, why is it that this year of all years we are seeing so many times, we've seen safeties miss tackles to go for these long plays, but why is it that it's coming down to a safety having to make the tackle in space, or else, they're giving up touchdowns? That's what I'm not understanding.
This time it's not me.
Oh, I know.
Okay. Go ahead.
In short, because they're overshifting their linebackers to the field against those trips formations. So, for example, yesterday was very blatant because Maryland, obviously, Matt Canada saw that on film, and they went unbalanced to the field. They'd shift their tackle over, and Ohio State's linebackers would be way out of place. So you'd have Pete Warner 25 yards outside the box in what's called a full cover down, meaning he's like head up on the slot receiver. So he's basically he's essentially a defensive back at that point. Then you'd have the Mike, Tough Borland, also outside the tackle box, outside the tight end to the field. So you're now left with 5 defenders against the 6 offensive line blockers running the opposite way, leaving basically your cornerback as your essentially becoming your new linebacker. So like that first one that was on Damon Arnett, not providing force support, but you're asking your corner to be a linebacker there. And then the safety essentially has to become your other linebacker. And to like throw gasoline on the fire, it would leave Malik Harrison as the one linebacker in the box. And inexplicably, I hope this is honestly just him messing up as opposed to like some kind of coaching technique they're using. He would fly to the play side or to the wide side of the field, even though the run play was just an inside zone the other way. There was like no action that suggested he should go that way. So it basically left the Brennan White, the boundary safety, with like 2 gaps to cover, which is pretty tough coming downhill. And obviously, so yeah, you have one guy to make a tackle, and if he misses, it's gone, instead of having any semblance of gang tackling because you got players in the vicinity.
Yeah, and Kirk, this is really strange because it's like it's not only, I think we can attribute this to 2 things. I mean, certainly in the defensive backfield, they're just not as good as we've seen at Ohio State in the past. But you also have to question the scheme because it's like, okay, we're on week number 11 now. The Ohio State coaching staff should see that they're not capable of making these plays as consistency as they'd like, and you would think that you would change the scheme to fit the personnel by this time of the season, right? I mean, isn't it a fair question to ask why they keep allowing this? Even if this scheme had worked in the past with different personnel, it's clearly not working with this personnel. So it has to be asked, why haven't they changed this?
It's one of those questions where I just, I don't have words for it. I don't know. It's, the way I judge how good players are is if in our rivals Yahoo College Football Fantasy Leagues, if that player is a free agent and he scores like 50 points like Booker McFarland's kid did, then I know that something's amiss. Because like I was like, does anybody even have this guy? And I looked and he's like the top added free agent. And I was like, yeah, no one even has him. And my league's like super active. So but it's to me it's like if you want to take a Coach Meyer quote, there's no such thing as stupid players. There's just stupid coaches. That's something I heard many a time in the staff room. So I'm just saying, like, I know that's harsh, but that's their urbanism.
Well, and if I could add something real quick, it's almost just like it's some level common sense, but like they don't adjust to the opponent. So it's like that was like their day one install. Like this is how we defend like cover 1 or cover 4. Like we're gonna put our linebacker over here, like in these positions. But like just practically speaking, you're like, look at who we're playing. Like it's essentially a triple option team. The quarterback is a very inconsistent at best throwing the football. Like to take an example, Don Brown in Michigan would never just like sit his linebackers out there playing Maryland. He'd put 8 guys in the box. It'd be like, prove to me that you can consistently throw the football to the wide side of the field. And like, they would have shut him down because the plays where Ohio State did have gap alignment and gap soundness, I bet Maryland had negative yards rushing.
Well, and here's the thing, Ross. You mentioned this during the game on Twitter, and this is what perplexes me. Like the first touchdown that they gave up in the fourth quarter, the one that Sheffield gave up, and I thought that was good coverage. I mean, Sheffield was there with him. He got a hand up, hit the ball, and just deflected right into the receiver's hands. Sheffield had pretty good coverage on that. But you mentioned why are they playing press coverage in that situation anyhow? With a quarterback that allegedly the book on him is he can't throw the ball downfield accurately. What are they even? I'm not even sure why they're playing press coverage in that situation.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, again, it's like they're stuck on day one install. Like, well, this is what we tend to do on 3rd and 8. And it's like, well, let's take into account like the factor, like the game situation, who you're playing. Like, sit in a soft cover 3. Like, I mean, we can say Sheffield had good position, but it's an awfully high rate of times when he has like quote unquote pretty good position and gets beat. So, like, why are you – that guy could throw the deep ball, okay, but he was never going to sit there and complete, like, 8-yard dig after 8-yard dig against you. So, like, sit into cover 3, put your linebackers in the box, and just, like, who cares if that's not what you normally do?
Yeah, it's funny because, Kirk, I want to ask you this question. I kind of felt like in the first quarter it was mostly scheme that was burning them, and, maybe there's a little bit of residual effect subconsciously with – okay, this is the game before Michigan, and that's something I talked about earlier on the show. We have seen a trend here of games being, closer than maybe they should be the week before Michigan, and there's probably a psychological reason for that. But I thought in the fourth quarter, and tell me if I'm wrong, I thought the defense actually looked tired in the fourth quarter. Did you get that impression?
Well, I mean, when you're chasing a guy who's run for 300 yards against you, I mean, you're going to be pretty tired. I mean, damn. I mean, they're not, they're football players. They're not cross-country runners, but, they had to basically run a 5K yesterday to track down that running back. But, I don't know. I always think there's a little bit of the psychology to Michigan's next week, and, everyone's saying you're going to kill Maryland, and, they don't have their starting quarterback, and, they're not really playing for anything, and you're playing for everything. And I think that was pretty evident yesterday that our guys weren't really locked in. But even still, I mean, it's alarming that we got shredded the way we did. And in reality, if that quarterback completes that 2-point conversion, it is a sad day in Columbus right now. Because, I mean, that guy was wide open in the end zone. We just got lucky.
I will say on that play, Ohio State got a little lucky, but then again, they had a lineman blocking way downfield. 3 yards into the end zone.
The right tackle like 6 yards downfield.
Yeah.
Ohio State's never going to get that call. They'll show him celebrating. He'll be touching the right tackle will be touching the goalpost, and they'll be like, "Oh, Maryland."
Now I want to turn our attention to the positives of this game, and because this kind of ties in as a good segue to what we're looking ahead to with Ohio State and Michigan this week. So Nevada Buck on the Horseshoe Lounge here this week on BuckeyeGrove.com had mentioned he was hearing that Dwayne Haskins has really kind of clicked as far as a leader, and he's been shown to be somebody that's really stepped up in practice and has kind of changed his mindset and his attitude, and you can see things clicking for him in practice. And I got to say, I mean, this game was looked like a Dwayne Haskins to me that was on a whole other level, both with his leadership and his accuracy and just making plays. Goes for over 400 yards. They bring the zone read back into the play or back into the scheme, and he runs for 3 touchdowns on top of his passing yards. Kirk, this looks like a Dwayne Haskins that I know it's a tough test he's got this week. The whole, this whole Michigan defense is going to be tough, with or without Chase Winovich, whether he plays or not. But this looks like Haskins, maybe things have clicked for him just based on what he played. I mean, they put up almost 700 yards against a team giving up 340 a game. What do you make of Haskins and his mindset here going into this game?
I think him finally pulling the ball and read options is going to be a game changer. Now he still runs like a guy who's had about 20 beers at Heinegate, but it's one of those things where I just him pulling it and having 3 rushing touchdowns changes his whole dynamic. It's not pretty when he runs, but Urban essentially called him a pussy like at the press conference. He says, he's going to be tougher in leadership. He's going to actually pull those balls and have the umph to run it. Because Urban loves like Tebow and he loves like JT and kids that they're not scared to lower the shoulder, or Cam Newton. So like Dwayne hasn't showed us that at all. He's been very, I guess, tippy toe-ish when he's ran the ball. He slides 4 yards before anyone can even touch him. But I think it's going to be a new dynamic that Michigan's going to have to account for this week.
And Ross, I mean, we've talked about it so many times. Just having that numbers advantage, we saw. I mean, Ohio State's offense was so much better, even on 3rd and 4th and short this week, by having the ability for Haskins to make that read and keep it. Like Kirk said, he's not going to be accused of being a graceful runner. It wasn't pretty, but he got the job done just by being able to turn the corner and just get those couple yards. Ohio State did really well on 3rd and 4th down this week.
Yeah, and I would say that the defense somewhat overshadowed that. To me, that was the best offensive game they've had all year, all things considered, as you kind of alluded to. Maryland is actually a pretty decent defense. They're a horrible offense, which makes it all the more crazy. But anyways, yeah, that him pulling it is, it's at some level kind of frustrating because I'm convinced they'd be undefeated and would have beaten Purdue if they had been able to do that in the red zone a few times and get up in that game. But nevertheless, like it opens, I have a clip that I'm going to put in my article this week where like all of a sudden you see that Maryland outside linebacker sitting. And what do you know, like tight zone starts working and they ran inside zone. They did some nice things yesterday to like play with tendencies to not always tell which way it was going, but a vast majority of Dobbins' yards came on their base tight zone play that everyone's come to love to hate this year because of that overhang defender. And Haskins pulling it makes all the difference, just even occasionally, especially in the red zone, makes all the difference in the world.
Kirk, Mike Weber, it looks like he, had a quad injury, caused him to not play on Saturday. It sounds like he's going to be good to go for Michigan, but, J.K. Dobbins had nearly 40 carries in this game, well over 30, and you could tell he was noticeably tired by the end of the game. Let's assume for a second that Mike Weber, for some reason, cannot go this week. They certainly, I don't think, want to put Dobbins in a position to where he's carrying the ball 30-some times against this Michigan defense. So do they rely, if that happens, do they rely more on DeMario McCall, who looked good in limited time, or do they maybe turn to a Master Teague who did not play in this game? What do you think they do if, for some reason, Weber can't go against Michigan?
I think you just shoot up Weber and make him go and say you don't have a choice. It's like, it was bizarre to me because for the whole, most of the game, people couldn't understand why he was out, and I was like, if he has no chance of playing, I was like, why does he have his helmet on? Why does he, most guys, like, I guess he might have been, like, an ultra, like, emergency mode where he, like, was fully dressed and had his helmet on and stuff, but it was really kind of weird. But, I mean, that's what Icy Hot's for, and, J.K. Dobbins is great because he's like a pocket-sized dude that you could just, you could literally fill up a Solo cup with ice and water, and that could be an ice bath anywhere you go for him because he's so small. So you just dunk him in it and keep his legs fresh after the 40 carries. But it's It's one of those ones where I think it's like Coach Tress used to always talk about how guys magically like get healthy for the Michigan game. Like, like I'm sure we'll see Chase Winovich. He looked like he died on the field on Saturday, and he'll be back. And I'm sure we'll see Mike Weber. And because if you don't see him for this one, you got a lot of questions. Unless it's something completely like major. But I think we'll see Mike this week.
Ross, what are they doing on offense? I mean, we know, they implemented the zone read finally, but what are they doing on offense? Because whatever they have done, the offensive line is getting noticeably better. They're getting better push. They're more consistent. They're getting positive yards each time. You can see a difference in this Ohio State running game right now.
I think it's been like that since after the bye. I think occasionally, like last week, it was somewhat covered up by those overhang defenders that I talked about earlier, making the tackle and block. But when those guys were accounted for, even against Michigan State, the Ohio State interior got a very good push. And as I said, when you put that together with being able to keep those guys out of the box, and then you can just actually allow the offensive linemen to block the guys they're responsible for, they're doing a pretty good job. And as I said, when you put that together with, they did some nice things yesterday, with like running inside zone to the halfback and the tight end side, or like running it, flipping around based on where Maryland's alignment was, letting Haskins have some ability to like do a check with me. But I think it kind of shows at the bye, I think they did do some addition by subtraction and basically decided like, we are a zone team. This is what we're going to run. We're going to run inside zone and outside zone. And you guys are like, buckle your chin strap and let's do it. And I think it seems to have had an effect with the offensive line.
Kirk, watching Michigan yesterday, they struggled a little bit more than usual. Defense, actually, Indiana gave them a lot more problems than any team had done so far this year. Offensively, they moved the ball pretty well, but one thing that stuck out with this Michigan team against Indiana, and it's been kind of a problem for them this year, is they have not finished drives off in the red zone very well. I'm curious how much you've seen of Michigan, and do you think that could be an issue against Ohio State this week?
I think it could be. It's gonna be really interesting to see what how they look with Ed being up there now. Because Ed Warner knows us as good as anybody. Now he's on Michigan's sideline, and be interesting to see what they implement, who they go after. Because he knows our personnel and he knows our scheme, so that'll be an interesting deal. Plus they run a good amount of the odd front, which is going to be a pain in the butt, and it'll just be interesting to see who they have because Bush looked a little dinged up at the end of the game. Winovich allegedly did a collarbone, and it'll be interesting to see who makes the trip and who's productive in that game. So, I feel good about it. I don't. This Ohio State team reminds me a lot of the 2013 team where we have a great offense and basically no defense. So it's like every game's a shootout, including that 2013 Michigan game, which is the one where Tyvis had that pick on the 2-point play or whatever when they try to win it on us. So, it's going to be an interesting one. I don't know. I get Michigan's good, but everyone's scared to death of them. But they didn't look that great against Indiana. So it's going to be interesting this week.
Ross, one thing that kind of drives me crazy, and I understand it a little bit more in this situation because Ohio State has given up a lot of points and a lot of yards to some teams that they shouldn't. But I hate comparing. Well, Maryland put up 50 points on Ohio State, so can you imagine what Michigan's going to do? I hate that because it's a different offense, it's a different situation, different circumstance. These things they're not transitive, they don't carry over. But I'm curious, do you see any similarities or how many similarities or differences do you see from what Michigan does to what Maryland was trying to do against Ohio State, apparently successfully this past weekend?
So to me, what has made Michigan a competent offense this year, I wouldn't say they're great, but better than they were, is the addition of the zone read with Patterson. Once they started doing that against Wisconsin, things really started clicking for them. So the first thing to me that you have to do is prepare to play them as a spread run team. Like, yes, they'll use multiple tight ends. Yes, they'll occasionally go under center now, but like, you better be ready to stop like the split zone. And then it's called the Bible play. It's where the tight end acts like he's blocking back, then he pulls around to lead Patterson on the keep. So that to me is the first and foremost. If you can contain those gaps, then you'll be okay. Which saying that, however, is as we saw, the Ohio State's had some issues with gap responsibility and alignment. And so we'll, that remains to be seen. But obviously, I think, Michigan will move the ball some. So as you said, it's limiting them in the red zone will probably be the key for the defense.
Yeah, Michigan, and I know one similarity, I think you kind of touched on this too, is Michigan really does like to overload the line to the strong side, and they like to move guys around. So that's one thing that Ohio State will have to do much better this week than they did against Maryland. Before we wrap this up here, I want to get you guys. I'll have more preview of this game throughout the week, of course, and I'm going to do an extra episode on Thursday as well as one on Friday previewing Michigan. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. Very excited about this week. You have a Thanksgiving Day edition of the podcast. I hope everybody will be able to listen to. But I do want to get your guys' take on this game before we wrap it up. Kirk, I'll start with you. What do you think? What do you expect here this week between Ohio State and Michigan? I know it's a hard game to predict sometimes. Where these two teams are at right now. What do you expect in this game on Saturday?
It's going to be tough, but I know that there's always good karma if I can get Ross to laugh. So, Ross, you're talking about the Bible play, right?
Yeah.
You're just talking about the Bible play?
Yes.
So, Tom Herman in 2012, we wanted to put in a throw-up of the Bible play. And Tom Herman wanted to call it 1415 Jesus. And Urban is a devout Catholic. And so we present this play, and it's called 1450 Jesus off of the Bible action. And Urban had an absolute shit fit. And it was one of the funniest things. And I was like, Tom, you're so dumb. I was like, this guy's he's named after a pope, for God's sake. So it's but I when you said that, I was like, I gotta tell that quick 30-second anecdote. So Ross laughing at my stupid story is a good karma for the Michigan game. But
right.
It's one of those things where you referenced earlier. It's it's hard, and I hate cliches, or it's records don't matter and all that kind of stuff. But in 2004, nobody in a million years would have picked us to beat that Michigan team. That Michigan team was going to the Rose Bowl, and we had just lost to Purdue, and we sucked. And Troy Smith had his coming out party that day, and we won. We were a young team. We beat a veteran Michigan team. They had Braylon Edwards and a bunch of guys. So I don't know. It's one of those things where 2003, you'd have thought we had won because we had 20 guys back from the national championship team that beat Miami, and we lost. So it's really whoever plays the best on the day, whoever is the toughest, and whoever doesn't turn the ball over. And I feel fine with what we got going on. So, it's not like we're not scoring. We're giving up a lot of points, but we're scoring. We had 700 yards on Saturday, so it's they got to make sure they can stop us too now.
Mike Hart, 0-4. Sorry, I'm coming down with a cold. So Ross, I'll give you a chance to here wrap this up here. What do you expect from this? I know schematically Michigan presents a lot of problems. Obviously they're playing really, really well, playing better than Ohio State is, but it never comes down to necessarily who was playing the best coming into this game. It just matters who makes those extra couple plays and who's a little bit tougher in this game. So how do you see this game playing out, knowing what we've seen in the past in this rivalry?
Yeah, I mean, I gave some of my keys for the defense. I think if there's one unit that it's been the best this year, it's obviously the Michigan defense. That said, I think Indiana kind of showed a little bit. The relative weaknesses of the Michigan defense are areas where Ohio State is strong. You basically want to get their safeties matched up on your slot receivers, and their defensive tackles can be moved if you run vertically, and so that fits pretty well with Ohio State running tight zone and featuring Campbell and Hill. I think that it just sort of at the more intangible level, the best thing that can happen to Ohio State is to be an underdog in this game, because Ohio State is so used to being the favorite that it totally flips the script for Michigan to come in with all the pressure on them, that they're in the playoff spot position. They have to play in Columbus. None of those guys have ever beaten Ohio State. And now you're making Ohio State an underdog at home. And so I think as an Ohio State fan, the bigger the spread can be for Michigan, the better. But, and then it comes down to, Dwayne Haskins, the good thing on this game is it was the first time I would say that he really made some plays outside the structure of the offense that kind of threw the team on his back. and carry them. And so if he can do that, especially scrambling against Michigan's man blitzes, as Kirk said, I think if Ohio State can score points, they've got a chance.
Ohio State and Michigan coming up noon on Saturday. As I said, we will have a special Thanksgiving edition of the Unscripted Ohio podcast. A lot of stuff coming up this week, which I'll talk more about later. But should be a great game and a great week here on the podcast to preview it. I thank Kirk and Ross for joining me for our weekly breakdown. You can catch Kirk on Twitter at Kirk_Barton and Ross on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton. And, of course, both of them are analysts on BuckeyeGrove.com. Guys, I appreciate it, and we will be back next Monday to break down what everybody hopes is a big Buckeye victory. Thanks for joining us, guys, and we will talk to you again next week.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
All right, as we wrap up the show here, we're going to have a little bit of Ohio State basketball talk real fast. Not a lot to talk about Ohio State. 89-61 win against South Carolina State. This is a game where they were favored by 31 and a half points. So really this was about what you would expect for the Buckeyes. They had a lead as high as 35 late in the game before it wound up falling into that final 28-point margin. But it's still, the competition is suspect, and so setting that aside and taking that into account, though, this is still a very good win for Ohio State. Caleb Wesson came out and really asserted himself very, very quickly and very easily in the first half, and that was good to see as he did not play well against Creighton. Chris Holtman saying after the game that Wesson had been playing with some flu-like symptoms, so he thought that clearly affected his play. But Wesson looked a lot better in this game. The thing I like about this Ohio State team is they continue to show toughness, although I think the defense did let up a little bit in the second half, kind of let South Carolina State never got back into the game. I don't think they were within like maybe 22, 24 points in the second half, so it was never really close, never in doubt. But I thought the defensive effort did kind of subside just a little bit there in the second half with that big lead. But look, Ohio State, I thought, got a really good performance from Musa Jallow, probably his best floor game that he's had, 6 points, 7 rebounds, had a couple of assists, couple of steals, couple of blocks. He really played a good all-around game. He was more assertive, got into the paint a little bit, did a good job finding an open man. And really, this is just kind of a microcosm of what we're seeing out of this Ohio State basketball team, because there are a lot of different guys that can contribute in a lot of different ways. Andre Wesson had a good game. Luther Muhammad, another really good game. Dwayne Washington continues to be instant offense on the bench. Coming off the bench, I should say. He comes into the game, can light up the scoreboard in a hurry for the Buckeyes. So they have a lot of different guys that can score and a lot of guys that can defend and play interchangeable with different positions and different roles. So this Ohio State basketball team now 4-0 on the season. Tuesday, tomorrow night, they will be home again against Stanford. And then Friday night, remember, is the return to St. John Arena against Cleveland State. That should be a lot of fun seeing the Buckeyes back in St. John Arena. That game, by the way, is sold out. So there will be some nostalgia with that being a sold-out crowd at St. John Arena, and also them playing the night before the game. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a great atmosphere being back in St. John Arena. Next week, by the way, Wednesday, November 28th, Ohio State will be home against Syracuse in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Syracuse taking a couple of losses at MSG over the weekend. Still, that will be an interesting test for the Buckeyes. We'll see how they do against a zone, because that's going to be really interesting. Syracuse bringing that 2-3 zone to town. Let's see how Ohio State handles it with ball reversals, three-point shooting, all the like. So that's going to be a tough test, despite the fact Syracuse has been a little up and down so far. But we will preview that, talk a little bit more about it next week. In the meantime, as I said, Stanford coming up on Tuesday for the Buckeyes, Cleveland State coming up on Friday night for the Buckeyes. And look, it's going to be tough sledding here for the Buckeyes going forward. 20-game league schedule in a Big Ten conference that suddenly is looking like probably the deepest league in America right now. There are legitimately 10, maybe 11 teams that are capable of making the NCAA tournament based on the way they're playing so far. So Buckeye basketball should be a lot of fun to talk about. But this week, as I said earlier, going to be focused on the game Thursday, Thanksgiving, Unscripted Ohio special podcast as we preview Ohio State and Michigan. And then Friday we'll be back, Bill Bender of the Sporting News and also Mark Gibler of Buckeye Grove Recruiting Analysts. We will talk about recruiting, big visits coming up here for the Buckeyes this weekend. So that is going to do it for me. You can catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. Catch me as well as Kirk and Ross and Mark and Kevin Noon and all of our interns, Andy and Cameron. You can catch us on BuckeyeGrove.com. Catch the show Monday and Friday on Buckeye Grove. And, of course, you can catch it on Thursday as well this particular week. And you can also listen to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Please find us, search for us, follow us, rate us, review us, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, we will be back at you again on Thursday with a special Thanksgiving Unscripted Ohio. I hope you'll listen to then. In the meantime, please have a great week, and we will be back at you on Thursday. Have a good one, everybody. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.